one of the most important headquarters of the Russian army was blown up. The Kremlin called for an emergency meeting after this operation, and Putin's resignation was demanded at this meeting. Major problems began to manifest themselves at many points in the Russian bureaucracy. Putin officially fled the Kremlin. The reaction of one of the soldiers during the visit to the military headquarters created great tension. The army no longer wants Putin. The military headquarters where Putin was visiting was detected by Ukrainian forces, and a major operation was organized in the area. The consequences of the situation cost Russia a lot of money. The anti-Putin and anti-war protests in Moscow have increased so much that the Russian people have started collecting signatures among themselves. Russian bureaucrats took action when Russia's economic woes brought on by many recent failures became too great. Putin's absurd decisions without thinking about the consequences have angered every layer of the Russian people. In return, this is starting to cause Putin a lot of trouble. In a secret meeting attended by most of the bureaucrats in the Kremlin, they argued that Putin should resign immediately, after dismissal by the deputies who think that Putin's KGB-style solution methods are no longer working in the modern world. All kinds of popular strata in Russia started riots. One of the important headlines is that Russian commanders who had previously attempted a coup in the Russian army decided to make peace with Ukraine as a result of the meeting they organized after many failed operations that proved to the whole world that Russia's military power has weakened considerably. Russian generals have become unable to hide their discomfort. However, it is thought that the situation is not limited to the generals, but almost the entire Russian army defends the same thing. Putin is said to have learned that he was asked to resign thanks to the KGB's deep intelligence service, especially the fact that the army is also aware of the risk that a coup will be launched against Putin within the army. Realizing that this would be a big problem, Putin left the Kremlin without wasting time and left the region under the pretext of checking the headquarters. Putin stopped for inspection at a Russian headquarters in the Luhansk region, revealed all the events that took place. Many events took place that deeply affected Putin. The soldiers did not react to Putin's arrival at the headquarters. They did not respect him and did not care. Immediately after that, a Russian soldier serving in the army lashed out, which shocked everyone in the region. "You are sending us against the Ukrainian army with old weapons. Don't our lives have any value?" Putin's bodyguards attacked the soldier with a quick move. Another part of the bodyguards who took action immediately after the soldiers' outburst surrounded Putin and stood against the soldiers for important purposes against a possible threat. With the increase in tension, it was shown to everyone how Putin could make a harsh move. Immediately after the events, the Russian soldier who shouted at Putin was caught and taken to the prison under the headquarters to be punished. Putin, who did not expect this reaction, decided to have dinner with the soldiers in order to reduce the tension in the headquarters. However, the reaction Putin received from the army soldiers shattered all his dreams. Putin had a table prepared for dinner in the soldiers' mess hall. Before the dinner, he stood up to the soldiers and said, "The Russian army will win the war in the ongoing war." Then Putin did not get any reaction from any soldier. Putin sat down and called his advisor to taste his food. When Putin's advisor took a spoonful of the food and fell to the ground, Putin's bodyguards were mobilized. The bodyguards surrounded Putin and took him out of the dining hall. Putin ordered his bodyguards to put the commander in charge of the headquarters in jail to be tried in a military court. This commander is expected to face major penalties. However, the real troublesome events started after that. Israel and Britain, which have provided great support to the Ukrainian army with their long-term work, provided a great intelligence to the Ukrainian army and said that Putin had left the Kremlin and was in a military headquarters in Luhansk. The Ukrainian army, which started preparations after receiving the intelligence, finished the preparations in a short time and took action since it was not known when Putin would leave this as orders. Every second was very important for the Ukrainian army. First of all, the Ukrainian army launched Bayraktars to identify the route paths. As a result of sonar scans, it was determined that there were no obstacles that could stand in the way of Ukraine. As soon as the Ukrainian special forces received this news, they immediately took action surrounding the designated military headquarters. Ukrainian infantry units laid remote-controlled forts around the area for surprise attacks that would cause the Russians to lose their positions. Then one of these remote-controlled C4s exploded. The Russian army came out in disbelief. The Ukrainian army, which first dealt a big blow to the Russian troops who were forced out by the grenade throwing, then went on the offensive when it realized that the Russian army was not responding at all during the offensive of the Ukrainian army. While the headquarters continued to be bombed with the news given to the archives, it was realized that the headquarters was completely closed. At this point, the heroic Ukrainian army came up with an ingenious idea and activated the jammers. And immediately afterwards, missiles were fired with HIMARS to make a big hole in the north gate. The incessant missiles completely destroyed the Russian military headquarters, while many Russian soldiers lost their lives in the south quarters. The Ukrainian army moved in to completely neutralize the inside of the headquarters. The Ukrainian army searched all the floors of the headquarters one by one and found the lifeless body of Putin's advisor in the dining hall. Looking at the messages on the phone taken out of Putin's advisor's pocket, the entire Ukrainian army was shocked. It was learned that Putin moved from this region about 1 hour ago with the destruction of the headquarters. The use of jammers at the most appropriate point completely prevented the news from reaching the Kremlin. This situation caused many soldiers to lose their lives without Putin's knowledge. The Ukrainian army managed to capture the commander of the headquarters without waiting after the operation and the events that took place, thanks to the commander who is understood to be in prison unjustly. The whole world is aware of the assassination of Putin. The confession videos taken by the general were transmitted to Putin in a way that no one would have thought of. Ukrainian soldiers who captured the advisor's cell phone neutralized the jammers and delivered this video to Putin's chef bodyguard. In the face of this situation, Putin officially went crazy. Putin decided to organize an extraordinary meeting immediately after the events. This meeting, which was held with the participation of many high-level bureaucrats, attracted great attention with the absence of any opposition figures. The meeting lasted about 9 hours. At the end of the meeting, Putin issued many decisions that would make Russia completely anti-democratic. One of the most important of these decisions was to completely take the authority to use the initiative in the hands of the army. The decision that every decision taken to maintain order within the army and to reduce the possibility of a coup will be laid in front of Putin drew attention. Putin will now be able to carry out activities without caring about the public in any way with his new anti-democratic form of government, which has no limits what he can do. However, the 2000s are not years that these dictators can handle because of the situation. No matter how harsh decisions Putin takes, it can be seen quite clearly what the result will be after these decisions. As it is known, the only problem that every country president who exhibits dictatorial behavior cannot solve is the people. The fact that people of Russia are also very angry with Putin explains the situation. The war between Russia and Ukraine is locked on the eastern axis. Kiev troops are advancing in Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. There's talk of impending fall eddies in Bakhmut. Details are limited and the situation is subject to change at any time. But the fierce battle for the city of Bakhmut may end soon. The sudden offensive operations launched by the Ukrainian armed forces under the leadership of the Azov regiment last week surprised the Russian troops. Russian soldiers who did not expect a sudden offensive operation from Ukraine retreated to their positions at some points. Some Russian troops even abandoned their positions and tried to escape from the city. The escape, touted as a tactical retreat by the Russian Ministry of Defense, did not escape the attention of the Wagner leader. Yevgeny Prigozhin denied the allegations of the Russian Defense Ministry. Prigozhin stated that the Russian soldiers fled, exposing the wings of the city while the Russians were struggling with these problems in Bakhmut. The Ukrainian troops continued to advance with firm steps. The advance of Ukraine meant the casualties for the Russian army multiplied exponentially. The offensive operations of the Kiev forces were supported by artillery and rocket units supported by HIMARS. Successful artillery and rocket fire hit the Russian formations from exactly 12. Russian troops had experienced déjà vu the other day. Russian casualties were increasing daily. In the last 24 hours in the Bakhmut region, Ukrainian forces have carried out 12 airstrikes and more than 30 missile and ground attacks on Russian positions. The sounds of artillery and rocket shots rang all over the city. Weapons accompanied the chorus of cannon and rocket sounds. The situation of the Russian soldiers was very difficult in Bakhmut, where the blood pressure did not decrease even for a minute. 92 Russian soldiers who could not resist the attacks of Ukraine were eliminated. 156 Russian soldiers were also wounded. The focus of the Ukrainian attacks was on the Russian arsenals and key command positions. Destroying enemy logistics is Ukraine's specialty. The main task of the Ukrainian HIMARS and artillery units was to wipe out the Russian arsenals off the map with a successful HIMARS attacks and the support of the Air Force. Ukraine destroyed 13 Russian arsenals in just 24 hours. There were huge explosions when their ammunition exploded. After the explosions, black smoke filled the skies of Bakhmut. Concrete piles remained in place of ammunition depots. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed 2 infantry vehicles, 5 artillery installations, a Gvozdika self-propelled howitzer and 5 unmanned aerial vehicles belonging to the Russian troops in their latest offensive. Recent casualties limit the operational capabilities of the Russian troops. Ukrainian Armed Forces Eastern Group spokesperson Serhiy Sharavathi stated that the Russian forces had much more shells at the beginning of the mass attack. Serhiy Sharavathi stated that Russian troops fired an average of 33,000 to 35,000 rounds per day near Bakhmut and Kupiansk. Although the Russians have limited their operational capabilities, they have not completely abandoned Bakhmut. According to UK defense officials, Russia has redoubled its efforts to take Bakhmut by increasing the number of troops deployed to the town of Donetsk. Defense officials said the redeployment represented a significant commitment by the Russian command. A separate assessment by the Institute for War Studies stated that the chances of Russian forces besieging the area had stalled as the conflicts continue. War-related evaluations are also coming from various organizations and officials. In another development, U.S. officials plan that the Russia-Ukraine war is more likely to escalate into a years-long frozen conflict and join their ranks in similar lengthy encounters across the Korean Peninsula, South Asia, and beyond. Among the options discussed within the Biden administration for a long-term freeze is where to draw potential lines that Ukraine and Russia would agree not to cross, but which would not necessarily be official borders. Given that neither Kiev nor Moscow seems inclined to admit defeat, this is a scenario that could prove the most realistic long-term outcome. Also, the growing perception within the administration that an impending Ukrainian counterattack will not deal Russia a fatal blow is becoming more and more likely. A frozen conflict in which conflicts stall, but neither side is declared victorious and the war is officially over could also be a politically acceptable long-term outcome for the United States and other countries that support Ukraine. The U.S. officials stated that they are planning a long-term conflict, whether it appears frozen or thawed. This type of planning is a growing focus of management, he said. However, the official stated that everything was urgent and short-term in the past months. 2 other U.S. officials and a former Biden administration official confirmed that a prolonged freeze on conflict was one of the possibilities the U.S. was preparing for. US officials are considering the long-term security ties Washington will have with Kiev, as well as Ukraine's relationship with the NATO military alliance. US officials emphasize that the war will remain hot for a while and that the Biden administration intends to provide Ukraine with the weapons and support it needs. With this emphasis, it shows that such discussions are in the early stages. Yet even such a planning proposal could undermine the confidence of Ukrainian leaders in their commitment to American causes. Speaking on behalf of the White House, a senior Biden administration official said a number of contingency plans were being evaluated. However, the official said the situation is volatile and the only safe prediction is that Russia will not conquer Ukraine. Many U.S. officials have avoided speaking publicly about how the Russian-Ukraine conflict will develop. General Mark Milley, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, has repeatedly predicted that this will result in negotiations, not a military victory, for either side. A Defense Department official said the nature of recent military aid packages to Ukraine reflects the Biden administration's shift to a longer-term strategy. The amount of equipment shipped directly from U.S. existing stockpiles has steadily decreased over the past few months, while aid packages used to purchase new weapons from the industry have increased. The Biden administration recently transferred $300 million worth of weapons from existing U.S. stockpiles. Primarily ammunition management provided $1.2 billion for the purchase of more complex weapons from industries such as air defense systems. Currently, Ukraine is preparing a large-scale counter-offensive against Russia. However, its timing remains unclear. In recent days, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has suggested that the counterattack will be delayed because Ukraine needs more weapons from its Western partners. Zelensky stated that the first important steps will be taken soon. US officials expect the war to continue after the counterattack. In the medium term, many see a stalemate in which the conflict continues. But neither side has gained much ground, or a war of attrition is expected in which both sides try to inflict huge losses of personnel and equipment on the other side in the hope that the enemy will not return. The performance of Ukraine and Russia depends on sometimes uncontrollable factors from air superiority to who is responsible in the Kremlin. A U.S. official stressed that the administration always plans both long-term and short-term possibilities. The longer the conflict lasts, the more likely it is that Russia and Ukraine will feel international and domestic pressure to negotiate a ceasefire or other legal mechanism to stop the war, even if it does not officially end the war. Some U.S. officials and analysts suggest that a rough model might be the Korean War. Active fighting in this conflict ended with a ceasefire in 1953, but even after 70 years, the war has not been officially declared. A former Biden administration official said a Korean-style stop when it comes to Ukraine is definitely something that's being discussed by experts and analysts inside and outside the government. Also, such paused wars occasionally restart. The ceasefire signed in 1994 between Azerbaijan and Armenia over the Nagorno-Karabakh region continued, albeit imperfectly, until violent clashes broke the peace in 2020. The two countries are now trying to negotiate. In any case, Western intervention also changes. A former U.S. intelligence official who has covered issues with Russia suggested that Biden aides seem more willing to discuss long-term security guarantees for Ukraine these days. Ukraine wants to join NATO, and the Secretary General of the military alliance has stated that he has agreed that its members will eventually join if Ukraine's bid for NATO membership stalls. Such guarantees could range from a NATO-style Article 5 mutual defense agreement to Israeli-style arms deals with Ukraine as a deterrent against Russia. Some current and former U.S. officials say that at least the Ukrainian military should receive special attention. This may include ensuring that Ukraine's weapons and equipment are compatible with NATO countries and joint training, even if Kiev is not in a military alliance. US officials emphasize that they try to avoid black and white thinking while planning the course of the Russia-Ukraine war. After all, it is possible that the conflict will end somewhere between an active war and a cold standoff. Do you think the new developments in the coming days can affect the course of the war? State your ideas in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our videos. Thanks for watching. There is a lot of news from the Volkanovaya direction. Here, after a short regrouping, Ukrainians ramped up the intensity of their attacks in order to leverage newly captured positions and generate new gains. One of the main axes of advance became the hills west of the river. If we look at the topographic map, we can see that Ukrainians gained a foothold right above the settlements. And as I told you last time, even if Russian claims were true and they indeed recaptured the settlements, they would not stay there for long due to the overwhelming fire from the hills. And this is exactly what happened today. Russian sources confirmed that they decided to retreat from Neskikny to more reliable positions. Ukrainian sources also posted drone footage that confirms that Russians abandoned their positions around Storozovoy as well. Some non-mainstream Russian sources claimed that the front line collapsed under the pressure of the second wave of Ukrainian attacks all the way to Makeyevka. But this is just the beginning, because Ukrainians also launched a massive attack from Zolotoneva. Russian sources reported that at first Ukrainians launched a small attack on Novokuznetsky to fix Russian forces and protect the flanks, while almost immediately launching a powerful attack towards Zorogin. Even the most prominent Russian sources confirm that Ukrainians very quickly cleared the tree lines and the fighting is taking place right in front of the settlement. As you can quickly notice, this attack completely cut off Russian forces in Blahodar, and Russian sources confirmed that Russian forces retreated to avoid being taken into a pocket, which means that Ukrainians secured Blahodar without a single shot being fired. There are also at least 3 more lines of attack along the western section of the front line, namely toward Rivne, Novogorgievka and Livani. The freshest reports indicate that Ukrainians secured near 3 lines in front of the settlements. However, the assault units were reportedly small, so for now, these are just supporting attacks. Overall, in 1 week of storming operations around Velika Novosilka, Ukrainians managed to liberate 95 kilometers squared of the ground. When it comes to the Kherson region, in the aftermath of the destruction of the Kakhovskaya hydroelectric power plant, them 600 kilometers squared of the ground appeared on the water. This means that the topography of the region has completely changed. 90% of Alaska and Ola-Pristin, which are the main Russian strongholds where they're hiding most of their equipment, were submerged under the water. The flooding has also destroyed many Russian first-line field fortifications that Russian military intended to use to defend against Ukrainian attacks. Rapid flooding has forced Russian personnel to evacuate as fast as possible. Recently released footage shows how Russians are using boats from the local tourist center. Unfortunately for Russians, there are only blue and yellow boats left. Recent footage also shows that Russians had to use their transport helicopters to evacuate from the Kinburn Spit because the flooding has reportedly cut off the main supply roads. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson Natalia Humaniuk stated that in some places Russian forces had to roll back by up to 15 kilometers. Local residents also showed what happened above the dam as the reservoir had been gradually emptied. The river width had shrunk by multiple kilometers. In fact, if we look at the satellite footage, we can see that vast areas have turned into land. If we increase the contrast of the image, we can also see how narrow is the main river path. This means that if the water level is continued to recede, Ukrainians will be able to establish a pontoon bridge and conduct a mechanized assault on a completely naked and unfortified part of the front line.